The purpose of this group is to put people in a room together that would normally never be in a room together.
I used to shy away from property manager. I learned that when you get up to a certain number of units.
Wow, that was a good feeling. So I think that was 2012, 2013.
There are investors who are my clients that haven't even bought it yet.
All right, good night, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back, Westbank real estate investors. This is our March meetup. Happy to see everybody. Another packed room tonight. We also live streaming right now, so if anybody is on their way or they can't make it, they could join us virtually right now. So everybody just shoot a quick wave to everybody in the Facebook group. All right. So I am excited about our guest tonight. So she is already very famous. It's what I learned throughout our group, throughout the city and the state. So she has more than 1 decade under her belt. Already, yeah, more than 1 decade under her belt as far as appraisal and real estate. So tonight we really want to get into what does real estate look like in the lens of an appraiser that is also an investor. So we want to walk away tonight with some tools. We want to walk away with some secrets, some tricks and hacks to get our portfolio where we need it to be. And we also want to hear the story of how, somebody evolves into this fan favorite that we have here tonight. So everybody, please, loud round of applause for Debbie Hebert.
Thank you.
So Debbie, first of all, how did you even get started in real estate?
So when I was young, very young, my dad and his brother, my uncle, built spec houses. They built the house I grew up in, my grandma's house, two houses for my grandma, my uncle's 2 houses, and houses across the street, houses down the street. And so I guess starting at about 8 years old, that's where we played because my dad and they worked on the houses. So I remember him paying me $0.25 to scrape the stickers off windows. And, the ends of the 2x4s were blocks and we'd build castles. So I kind of grew up in construction zones and didn't really think much of it really until, and I grew up in Metairie, but we did not go downtown and we did not go uptown. And I didn't even know that those big, gorgeous Victorian mansions existed on St. Charles because we stayed in Metairie. And I moved to California when I was 21 and I moved back 3 years later and I moved uptown and just fell in love with old houses and wanted to get involved with something to do with old houses. So on probably my 3rd career, I got my real estate license. It's, I guess, close to 27 years ago. And I love selling houses, but man, what a competitive market it is to be a real estate agent. I struggled. I just wasn't a real badger people, try to get customers kind of person. I was happy to help, but I wasn't a really good hustler for the business. And so I had a second job, and one of my friends' husband was an appraiser, John Cashman, and Kathy kept saying, Kathy's actually now a real estate agent broker, and John's a broker, kept saying, you should go talk to John about becoming an appraiser. And at the time, she and I were working together, we were selling memberships to a health club, and that was not my cup of tea. I was not a very good membership salesperson. And one day I said, you know what? What's his number? I'm ready. I really would love to go talk to him about doing something else. And I had no idea what an amazing opportunity they were providing. Him and her were providing to me. And he took me under his wing and trained me. And the hardest part about becoming an appraiser is finding somebody who's willing to train you. It's very, very difficult because, anybody, you have to train under a supervisor for a minimum of 2 years. And they're training their competition. There's no other way to put it, because most appraisers do eventually move on to start their own companies. And the most, as a mentor or a supervisor, the most you can really hope for is that they spend their 2 years working for you and give you 2 or 3 more years once you know what you're doing to help them make money for themselves, to pay them back for all the time and energy they spent training you. So, because usually the first 2 years, I mean, it takes that long to really know what you're doing. And they're not really making much money off of you at that particular time. So,
Are you able to make money during that 2 years?
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
most supervisors will give you a small percentage and kind of work your way of the fee, and you kind of work your way up based on how how steadily you're learning the tasks and skills that you need to eventually do it on your own. But it starts off low. I mean, it can be 5-10%, and most of the time you max out at 50 if you're a trainee, or even once you're licensed, if you're working under someone else. And most usually they'll be willing to split as 50 because it's all their business, right? And they have all the overhead. So, so that's kind of how I got started, and now it's been a long time.
So what did you learn once you got started, and after those 2 years? What is the difference between what it's actually like to be an appraiser versus what people think it's like to be an appraiser?
Oh, I always laugh whenever I go on an inspection, because the inspection part takes me 20 minutes. I mean, I measure with a laser, I draw on an iPad, I take my pictures on the iPad. I'm in and out of that house. It doesn't take me very long. I mean, usually 20 to 30 minutes and I'm done. And the homeowners are like, oh, that's all? I thought you were going to be here for 2 hours. I'm like, I'm not a home inspector. I'm an appraiser, and no, I'm not, I'm not crawling under the house or in the attic. So, that part usually goes pretty quick. But it's the sitting at the computer trying to figure out what the house is worth. That's what takes a long time.
And I'm glad you brought that part up. So what does that look like? So if measuring the house is 20 to 30 minutes, the values is what's most important to everybody. What did you learn about valuing properties right after you came out of those 2 years?
I mean, it's definitely a process. It's a skill set that you learn by doing, for the most part. I think one of the most important things to understand is that we're appraising in degrees, right? Degrees of quality and degrees of condition. So to kind of simplify it, that you start off with new, obviously, and then your next degree is what's in today's language is
Very
called
good.
so that's a C1 if you're looking at a mortgage lending appraisal. The next level is a C2, which compared to MLS listing, for the most part, would be excellent. So fairly new, renovated to the studs. You can't say it's new if it's renovated to the studs, but it's pretty dang close in many instances. Then the next level is very good C3, which is, a lot of things have been replaced and updated, but not everything. And then you go to good, which kind of is interchangeable. C3, C4, between a C3, C4, average is typically a C4, which is, not very much has been updated. Fair is barely livable, and poor is not livable. So, so in terms of the degrees of condition, I think one thing to remember and think about when you're considering your renovation and what are you going to do to this house to try to make it worth more money if you're borrowing or trying to resell, is the bang for the buck things, right? That's what most buyers are looking for. Like kitchens, baths, flooring, paint, light fixtures. If you have a choice between replacing all the windows, which of course is lovely to have new windows, they're more energy efficient, they're going to save you a lot of money. Most appraisers aren't really going to ding you for not replacing the windows. And most buyers are not going to walk away from your house because you haven't replaced the windows. But if you have replaced the kitchen and the bathroom, they're much more likely to buy it, and the appraiser is much more likely to notice it, right? And push you up closer to the C2 level. even if you didn't do the windows.
Yeah. So what about the experience on the appraisal side kind of attracted you to the investment side of the business?
Somebody, and I really wish I could remember who it was, once said to me that you can make a good living as an appraiser, but you're always going to be like a mouse on a wheel, working from one appraisal to the next. Clients are not allegiant. I mean, my client list is, oh gosh, I mean, clients just come and go constantly. And a lot of times you never know why, right? You don't know. Like, I'll have done, 200 appraisals for a company, and then whoever's in charge of their appraiser list leaves, and they hire somebody else. And all of a sudden, I get none. And there's not a whole lot I can do about it, right? I mean, I could call and say, what's going on? Why am I not getting any more work? But that person many times doesn't care. They came in, they got that job, and they start filling up the appraiser lists with the people that they know and the people that they want. So this person said, but if you really want to make, to gain wealth and knowledge, you need to be an investor. I mean, that's, take what you've learned as a real estate professional and appraiser and put it to work for you. So it stuck with me for a long time, and I wish I would have had the wherewithal to start investing way earlier than I have, but I'm happy to be able to do it now. So
Yeah, perfect. So now that you are investing, how are you looking at properties as far as when they're going to be a refinance or a resale? How do you think you look at them differently than a regular person that doesn't have extensive, deep knowledge of, like you mentioned, degrees? We have no idea what that is when we looking at it, but when you look at it, how you kind of weighing the properties before you buy them?
Well, I'm definitely, like I said, looking for the things that are going to give me the most bang for the buck. I mean, I'm really looking hard at the kitchens and the bathrooms in deciding whether I need to replace them or whether I can just paint the cabinets and put on a new countertop. Those things, I think, and then looking, really hard at my budget and trying to figure out which, how much can I spend and where is it going to be the most effective in my refi? Because I'm doing the BRRRR method, and I'm always got my eye on that refi.
Yeah.
And when I'm looking at my comparables for my purchase, I also want to make sure they're still going to be on the appraiser's radar within a year when it's time for my refi. I don't want to look at something and think that's the comparable I'm going to hang my hat on and the one I'm going to lean on when I do my purchase, and then realize that, oh wow, it sold 10 months ago. So when it's time for my refi 4 to 6 months from now, it's going to have rolled off because most appraisers are not going to search back more than a year. And actually in today's market, because it's changed so much from a year ago already, I'm not even going back a year anymore. I'm really trying to stick to 180 days and looking for comparables and staying away from last spring because things are different.
Yeah. So how are you looking at the comps right now? So if you have, let's say, 123 Main Street, and you know that you're going to replace the kitchen and baths, and we know New Orleans setup is you could have a $400,000 comp here, and then you could have a $230,000 comp here. Well, if you're trying to decide what this thing is going to be worth once it's fixed up, how do you kind of play around with those different numbers, or what parameters are you kind of using to get the most precise value of what this should appraise for? Because you can't appraise your own properties, right? You still have to. So
no,
you
but I still have
hire
to
an
go
appraiser.
through the process to figure out what I think the appraiser that's going to go there is going to do, right? What are they going to pick? What are they going to look at? I mean, we're all looking at the same comparables. We're all looking in the MLS.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure that we pick the same ones, right? So I would say I'm trying to, in that particular instance, right, you're looking at like a $400,000, $150,000 spread. I want to know why. Why did this house sell for $250 and why did this house sell for $400? And I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to, and maybe it's location, maybe it's a bigger lot. Maybe it's quality. This one you walk in and it's the $400,000 one. You're like, wow. Or I'll have to say this, sometimes it's just luck, I mean, I think I actually had a conversation with my trainee about this today. Sometimes a house sells for a lot and doesn't fit in with all the other comparables I'm looking at just because they asked for more money and they got it. You know, I mean, today we were literally looking at one and everything else was selling in the 475, 450 range, and there was one that sold for 590, and it was literally 2 blocks away from another one that sold for 500, and I'm like, they asked 599, and they got 590, and the one that sold for 450, they were asking 475, and they got 450. So sometimes it's just as simple as that, and that's what I would consider an outlier because I don't have two or more other comps to support that high price. I don't necessarily need to throw it out, but I have to consider the fact that it's on the periphery, you know, that it's not the norm.
So I take averages. Is anything wrong with that? So I would take that 590, and if there's 5 other comps, I would add them up and divide them, and then try to play around with that number and say, well, it could be worth this or it shouldn't be worth that. You see anything wrong with that type of approach when we don't have access to all of the knowledge and tools to try to get a value?
I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with it, but I would really take a look at the ones you're choosing and make sure that they're fairly similar. Make sure that none of them are on a really big lot. None of them are only 3 years old as opposed to my subject that's 20 years old. You know, really just make sure for the most part they're the same, right? And if they are, then I think you're fine with doing an average. You know, if the condition, quality, and the square footage and number, like for the most part, they're the same. And honestly, a lot of times, if they're not the same, there's going to be a reason that it sold for more, and it's probably not going to be in your grouping, right? Like if it's on a bigger lot, more than likely it's not going to be in your group of 5. It's going to be a little higher, and you're not going to have pulled it. But just make sure, as best you can, that they're as similar as possible.
And how does, I didn't know that, how does lot size impact value? So if I renovate this thing condition or degree for degree, kitchens and baths updated, but I can't control the lot size, is that a big increase or decrease in value?
I mean, if they're within reason to each other, not tremendous, no.
Okay.
But if you have a comparable that's on a double lot, or a comparable that's just on a much, much smaller lot because just of where it's situated and just where it is, those are ones I would tend to throw out and not use because they're going to sell for less or they're going to sell for more. I actually, somebody in one of my groups today posted and asked about central air and heat. Like, how much value is there in central air and heat? Should I put in central air and heat? It's expensive, right?
Right.
And my comment back to him was, well, there is a value to central air and heat. I mean, people are typically, if your house down here is got window units, especially for a resale, not so much for renting it, and then the one down the street's got central, and you're trying to sell the same house for the same amount of money or close to the same amount of money, that's the house with central is going to sell first, right? So it's going to be valued. It's going to be valued higher. And as far as an appraisal, we have to adjust, and we have to make sure we have one sale that doesn't have central air and heat because clearly that's more desirable for most people. And it gets even more precarious when you're doing a multifamily, right? Because it's a big decision. I've been faced with it. I've just bought some doubles that all had window units, and I'm like, do I bite this bullet and put central air and heat in these doubles because it's going to be $16,000? You know, am I going to be willing to do that? And how is it going to affect me with my refi? You know, is because if the appraiser pulls sales that have central, I'm going to get dinged $10,000, $12,000, $16,000 on each one of those comps because I don't have central air and heat. So it's always, that's one thing I think is a real good thing to look at, especially if you're buying in New Orleans and older neighborhoods that don't necessarily have it. You know, that's a judgment call, but make sure when you're looking at your comps, you have at least one that doesn't have it because that's the one that the appraiser is going to look at too.
Yeah. Is there a resource that we could find that would quantify those adjustments? Is there like a online resource or anything in MLS that would show us that HVAC will get you this much versus window units? Or
Not really, because for the most part, we try to extract it. So what we're trying to determine in doing the appraisal is the market reaction to that thing, right? So what is the market reaction to a garage versus not a garage? And it comes down to neighborhoods. Like if I'm appraising a house uptown, most houses don't have garage. You're lucky sometimes if they even have a driveway,
Off-street
right?
parking.
So off-street parking can be rare. So you can't really do it that way, only because a garage uptown is going to be worth a heck of a lot more money than a garage in Metairie, right? Or an area like, say, a newer subdivision where every house has a garage. Well, if you have a house in a newer subdivision that, for whatever reason, doesn't say somebody enclosed the garage, right, made it into living area. Well, now they have a bigger house, but they don't have a garage. So, they may get a buyer that's going to pay a little more because they have a bigger house, but you also may get a buyer who's not going to buy their house because they don't have a garage. Right. So you really, can't. It's more of a process, I guess,
Okay.
And it really comes down a lot of times to where the house is and what's the market expectation of that thing,
And how we measure the expectation of that thing? Is it days on market? Is it comments? Like when you're looking
Usually-
at an MLS listing, how can we measure that?
It usually shows up in the value. I mean, that's where we're looking for it, is in the value is, once I have my subject and I have my 3 comparables, and what I'm doing in my process is I am adjusting the comparables to match the subject, right? So I'm making adjustments so that when I'm finished with all of my adjustments for obvious things like lot size, driveway, porch, patio, number of bathrooms, number of bedrooms, once I have them so they're adjusted to match the subject, what's the difference in the one that doesn't have the garage and my subject has a garage? Yep. I'm looking at that bottom number and trying to determine how, now that they're all the same, did the house with the garage sell adjust for more? Did somebody pay more because it had a garage and my subject doesn't have a garage, so this one's going to have to come down? Because that's where the market reaction is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
it does.
And that's why taking an average, most of the time it'll get you in the ballpark, but it's not going to be as specific as what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the difference in your clients. So your clients could be made up of banks, they could be made up of investors, they could be made up of homeowners. Can you remember like the difference in the expectations of each one of those clients and how you kind of manage those expectations?
Well, when I'm doing appraisals for mortgage lending, especially traditional mortgage lending, I don't really have any much contact. Actually, they're saying I shouldn't have any contact with the borrower because the borrower is not my customer. The lender is my customer. So I will, because I'm that kind of appraiser and that kind of person, if they call me and they want to know why their house didn't appraise for what they expected, I'm going to talk to them. Because I think any opportunity I have to educate the public about what I do and how nuanced and specified it is, that it benefits all of us, right? I will not necessarily speak to them specifically on the value of their house, but I will speak to them about the process and how I determined that number. But as far as working with investors, I have more leeway with working with investors, and I'm really enjoying the opportunity to work with investors because we can talk.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do a shameless plug here. Recently, I've started doing a lot of work with iFund Cities and OCG Capital, and they allow the borrower to choose the appraiser, and that's kind of unheard of in today's market, but they're hard money lenders. They can kind of make their own rules, and it's been working out well, especially in being able to have conversations about what adds value, what to do, what not to do, how to get to that number. And I mean, and specifically to the one that I just did for you,
Yeah.
right? So Emil, in this particular property, chose to not replace the kitchen, okay? However, Emil wasn't looking for top dollar for this house. He had gotten it for a good price. He decided what he wanted to put into it. His numbers worked. And he was like, I'm not going to do it because I don't feel like I have to do it. And it worked out, right? Because he wasn't looking for top dollar. So it depends on where your numbers are and what works for you, right? With what you're trying to accomplish. You don't always have to replace the kitchen if you're okay with that middle of the road value, because I'd say because you got a great deal, right?
And to add to that, so I spoke to you before, during, and after their renovation. So I'm gonna add to your shameless plug that when you hire Debbie, that's the advantage that you get, and that's one of the reasons why we didn't change the kitchen, because you told me on the front end, what your opinion was. You didn't tell me that it will or will not appraise for X, but this is the impact if you choose to go with this option. I was completely okay with that. So as far as investing now, when you talked about the past 180 days, where we are now, what's kind of different that you're seeing as far as the velocity of value? Because before, everything was moving super fast. So now when you're looking at a snapshot, is it moving just as fast, or what's kind of the rate of change that you're noticing right now?
I'm just probably trying to be more cautious, I think. I don't necessarily think things are appraising for less, especially older homes. I mean, I think some of the newer construction things aren't necessarily selling for what people or what the builders thought they would sell for, especially in the higher price points. But I'm not seeing a tremendous amount of drops in value yet. It could still be coming. I'm certainly, I have a lot of email searches auto emails set up for myself for my investing. I'm seeing a lot of decreases, reductions in prices. I'm also seeing a tremendous amount of people willing to do owner financing. Guys, it's nuts. Prior to this rise in interest rates, nobody checked that box saying that they were willing to do owner financing. And so I have a search set up just for people who are willing to do owner financing, and I'm getting emails to myself every day.
And you talking about MLS search? You set yourself up on the MLS search. Okay.
So it could still, there could still be some lower prices coming with people desperate to sell, and if they're going to keep reducing the price until it sells if they really have to. So. We could still see a somewhat of a downturn. I don't think it's going to be drastic like it could be in some other cities. I've always felt like New Orleans is fairly insulated to drastic downturns in the market because of the fact that we're landlocked and there's no place else to go. If you want to live in New Orleans, you're going to pay what it costs to live in New Orleans to some degree, because unless you're willing to cross over a body of water.
Yeah.
So that's my take on that.
No, I appreciate that. And as far as when you spoke about the builders, so with regular properties, you mentioned, kitchen for kitchen, bath for bath. With the builders, when everything is brand new, how could I make sure that I either get a higher value or I'm renovating dollar for dollar to make sure I get the value that I want when everything is brand new being compared to something else that's also completely brand new? Have you seen any advantages that a builder can get to get a higher value versus an existing new build?
I think probably it really comes down to quality when you're talking new builds.
Okay.
I've definitely gone into some new builds and it's just not high quality. It's not done. It's not done very well, and it's obvious not just to me, but to whoever's going to be purchasing it too. So yeah, I think it's really quality. And then we're looking at the pictures.
Yeah.
And I will say, it's a little tougher when we're doing construction loans, because it's near impossible to tell what kind of quality a house it's going to have when you're looking at the plans. So I think if you are a builder, and as a builder, it's always good to keep that in mind. I know it costs you whatever it costs you to build it, but the appraiser is really, for the most part, going to appraise it as if you're doing pretty good quality. unless, we have an example of something that you've built in the past and you say, okay, go look at this listing. I just sold it last year and this is the quality that I built. Yeah, we kind of will tend to err on it's going to be pretty nice because you're going to want to sell it,
Yeah.
right?
That's good advice. Tell us a little bit more about. I lost my train of thought real quick. What was my question, man? COVID. During COVID, when you were doing those appraisals, I asked the last question about velocity and the change of value. In real time, what did COVID look like when you were doing those appraisals, when everything was super hot?
I mean, yeah, it was kind of nuts. I mean, in terms of what people were willing to pay and being willing to go over the asking price. I don't think it was near as crazy here as some other cities. But we managed to keep up, I think, mostly because it didn't go up in, huge chunks.
Yeah.
Because the appraisals don't go up in huge chunks. I mean, that's kind of how the market stays a little controlled. We creep up because we're basing our numbers on historical data. So I don't typically make what we call time adjustments. I try to stay away from them in terms of using the most recent sales I can find, so I don't have to make time adjustments, because I think it's a scary pond to wade into, saying, oh, I'm going to appraise this house for $20,000 more because the market has increased. I think that's going out on a limb, and I'm not really one to go out on limbs. So, but if I can find evidence of a recent sale that has sold for more than 6 months ago, then I might consider it. And that's kind of what was happening with COVID. But I don't really think I had very much that didn't appraise.
Okay. Yeah.
And, if it doesn't, and somebody's willing to pay well over the asking price, they need to have enough money in the bank to write the check for the difference.
Yeah.
I mean,
Gotcha.
if they really want the house.
What's your opinion or your stance on disputing appraisals? So if appraisals come back, whoever the client is or whoever the other person is wants to dispute your values. I know some appraisers take offense to it. Some people, they just take it for what it is. What's your opinion when people want to dispute your values as an appraiser?
It doesn't happen very often.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, I'm willing to talk to them. I'm willing to take a look. And I'm also willing to change. I have changed. But I will just caution that, if you're working with a realtor, or you are a realtor, and you're going to be disputing an appraisal, that we're seeing the same sales that you are, right? So if you're expecting us to make a change, you need to have a really compelling argument or a different sale that we didn't use that's more comparable than the ones that are in the report. And sometimes that's what happens. Like, I think it was Gabriella told me that recently she disputed one, and she had a sale from the builder that wasn't listed in the MLS, and she was able to present that sale to the appraiser and say, look, here's the sale, here's the evidence that it closed, here's all the specs on the house, could you consider this one? And they did, because it was legitimate. But I think, look, not all appraisals are good. Not all appraisers are good. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to recognize that we are trained by another person. We go to school, we get lots of education, but the day-to-day job is learned from another appraiser. And so sometimes the quality of the appraisal and the appraiser's skill set is strictly based on who taught them.
Yeah.
And so if they weren't trained by someone who was really good at their job, they may not be a very good appraiser.
Yeah.
So there is certainly opportunity. I mean, actually, I disputed one. I was selling a house that my husband and he bought it before we got married, and we renovated it and put it up for sale. I think we spent 40 or 50 grand renovating this house, and the appraiser, And let me just tell you, like if I'm doing an appraisal for another appraiser or even a realtor, like I'm on my toes. I'm watching my P's and Q's. I don't want them to fight with me. And whenever you get an appraisal disputed by a customer, it has to go through the lender, right? Well, the lender is my customer. So I don't want people disputing appraisals all the time with my customer, because my customer is going to drop me and go find someone else that doesn't get appraisals disputed all the time. So this particular appraiser came to the house in the morning. Now, and this house was listed on the MLS. He had all the pictures and all the comments about all the work we had done. And he submitted that appraisal that afternoon because he was going on vacation. And I thought, and it was low. And I mean, on a sale, what the purchase price is. You have to analyze the contract as part of the process. So we know the purchase price. And it was, I don't know, $15,000 low. And I felt like, look, I priced it right. It was where it needed to be. And I was so livid. I thought he chose his comps before he came out to see the house, because he used comps that were not renovated houses. So, I mean, I fought it and I won. He raised it. He changed some of the sales. But yeah, so like perfect evidence of somebody who wasn't doing his job.
Well, and what's some other reasons, if everybody has access to the MLS, what's some of the reasons that they would overlook a comp that's perfect to the subject property that you've seen?
Well, I mean, you set up search parameters, and you make the assumption that your parameters are going to include the best sales. But say I'm searching from 1,200 to 1,500 square feet, because that's, the parameters I think are the best. Well, say the house next door to the subject was 1,550. Right? And it wasn't in my parameters. I didn't see it because I wasn't searching to 1,550. Well, if an agent came back to me and said, oh, well, the house next door just sold, and you didn't use it, could you consider it? Because it's really not that much, not that much bigger than some of the sales you use. That would be a reason, right? Or like my friend that knew about a sale that wasn't listed. I mean, sometimes off-market sales can be good too, if you are able to provide all the information that appraiser needs to be able to use it. And sometimes that's the tricky part, because you have to have access to the closing documents and preferably an appraisal that was done on the property for the sale, so that you have the square footage and the bed and bath count and all that stuff.
That's good information. Which closing documents we would need to submit?
Like the copy of the cash sale,
Okay.
just something with the price and the date,
Okay.
the
All right.
address.
All right, David, that's good to know. So,
Well, and the owner would have to be willing to share those things with you, or the buyer.
and in your opinion, what's good dispute etiquette, or what's the best approach? Because I know that could impact the way, if whether it's changed or not. So, from your opinion and from what you've seen, what's the best way to approach that dispute?
Well, sir, I think, look, appraisers are an odd bunch. I'm the first one to say, like, there's a lot of people that have been in the business for a long time, and they're not, like, a lot of them are not willing to talk to people, and they're very set in their ways, and I know there are appraisers that get offended when you hand them a stack of comparables at the house. I'm just not like that. But some people are, so I think the best way is, as nice as you can. I mean, as humble as you can, just saying, look, I mean, if you come at them ticked off, most times you're not going to get anywhere. I mean, even though you might have a really good case, they're just going to slam down on you, mostly because, once again, you're not their customer. The lender is their customer. So they don't care about making you happy. They don't. Because all they care about is making their customer happy, which is the bank. Because our job is to protect the lender's asset.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when you say that we or whoever is not their customer, getting back to the investor product, so like right now, as far as investors, like we are paying for these appraisals right now, so at least we feel like we should have some type of say-so in either who we get to use or how the value is impacted. What has the appraisal management, since this been in place, how has that impacted the way you kind of deal with the clients now?
For traditional, conventional FHA mortgages, the appraisal management companies, which is kind of a firewall in between the lender and the appraiser, there was legislation passed, I don't even remember how long ago, that kind of pushed appraisal managements, or AMCs as we call them, into the forefront. It's been a mess. I mean, because they started off by taking a percentage of the appraiser's fee to be able to pay for themselves. So say Chase Bank uses XYZ AMC. Well, they're going to put that appraisal out to bid to other appraisers, a bunch of appraisers, big old mass email, and try to get the lowest bid they can get. And then the AMC is going to keep, say the fee's $500. If they can get an appraiser to do the appraisal for $300, they pay the AMC $200. And I've always felt like the AMC is the cost of the bank doing business. Why is the bank not paying for the AMC? Yeah. But that's how this whole thing was rolled out, and it's been a mess. But now you'll see sometimes, I had somebody call me today wanting to know how much I charge for an appraisal because they felt like they were getting overcharged by their lender. And I'm like, you probably are, because it's not. I can promise you what they're charging you is not what they're paying me. And actually, Louisiana, we have a really strong coalition for the appraisers in Louisiana, and they fought it from the very beginning, or tried to anyway. So, and got legislation passed that in Louisiana, because they used to they wouldn't let us put the invoice in. A lot of them still don't let us put the invoice. And then they would say you couldn't even disclose how much you got paid. So now XYZ Borrow is paying $700-800 for an appraisal, thinking that's what the appraisal costs. Well, it's that, or how much I'm making. And absolutely it's not how much I'm making. I might be making $400, or if I'm lucky, $500. So Louisiana forced through this legislation where we are now able to put the appraiser's fee, particularly on appraisal management company files, of what I was paid. I can say appraiser's fee for this report was $300. So at least there's a little bit of transparency so that the borrower knows, hey, and if they want to balk and fuss, more power to them, you know, because it's a messed up system. And now, March 1st, Fannie Mae, well, they've already been doing a lot of appraisal waivers since COVID, but now they passed are trying to pass new legislation or rules, I guess, saying that they'll do accept hybrid appraisals, and that is a crazy product, whereas they send out a property data collector to your property that's not a licensed appraiser, that could be anybody, I guess. I think they have to pass a background check, and they go through like 2 hours of training on how to measure and take pictures. Wow. And they're going to come out to your property for probably $75, and they're going to measure it, and they're going to take pictures, and then they're going to send that information to an appraiser, and then they're going to try to pay the appraiser, I don't know, $150, $200 to put together a report based on someone else's inspection. And take full responsibility for that report for a house that they never even saw. So the appraisal world is very up in arms about it, and most of us are saying we're just not going to do it. So we'll see how that all pans out. But if somebody ever calls you and says that they're, you know, a property data collector, I'd call your lender and say, nope. I want a real appraiser and a real appraisal on my property. I don't want this crazy stuff.
Yeah. And if we could have a conversation with the appraisers and dispute and learn and be educated, what leverage do we have with these AMC companies? So once the lender puts the order in, is there any other type of dialogue with these AMC companies if we are dissatisfied with either who they selected to do the appraisal or even the value? You're
the first person that's ever asked me that. I don't really know. I don't know if there is. Okay. You know, the AMCs are kind of their own little entity, and I don't really know.
Okay.
I mean, I know you're going to try.
I'm gonna test it. Yeah. I just
So
want to know. Okay.
I'm looking forward to seeing how that pans out. But, you know, and obviously we're talking somewhat the difference between using hard money and being able to select your appraiser to some degree or have a smaller pool of appraisers that your hard money lender uses, as opposed to when you do your refi and you're going through a local bank or a national bank, most of the national banks do use appraiser management companies, and you're just going to get who you get.
Yeah.
I mean, and then in that instance, I'd say my best advice to you is to try to be really friendly and try to establish a dialogue with the appraiser that comes out to your property or wants to come out to your property, and see if you can I don't want to say influence, but see if you can try to just communicate with them the best you can about what you've done to the house and why you think it. I mean, I will say, if you throw a number out there, it is hard for the appraiser to forget the number that you threw out there.
Yeah.
So, for what that's worth.
Yeah. We're going to take audience questions in a little while, but I want to ask, in your opinion, from looking at values every single day, what is kind of your opinionated forecast on where you think our local market is headed from where it's been?
I think there's going to be opportunities for investors.
Okay.
I think there already are opportunities for investors. I think there's going to be more coming because there's still a lot of property that's just sitting there. Nobody's writing on it.
Yeah.
As far as plummeting values, I think it just remains to be seen at this point. I deal more in historical data than crystal ball, so I don't know.
Perfect. Questions from the audience. So the question is, and correct me, Steve, if I get it wrong, how are you viewing values hyper-locally, geographically?
How far do you go? So, yeah, as far as geographical area for choosing comps, the rule of thumb has always been a mile. And we just literally draw a circle. It's a mile. Yeah, and I mean, depending on, it really kind of just depends on where the house is. If there's going to be a lot of sales within a half a mile, I'll shrink my circle to a half a mile. But there are definitely rules and reasons why you have to go over a mile too. Just this morning, I'm working on a new construction in the lower 9. Y'all, they're like anybody building new construction doubles in the lower 9, Mike. They're not selling them. See, they're not selling them. So you know how hard it is to do an appraisal on a new house, a double in the lower 9. Perfect. So it's hard. It's hard. There's nothing to choose from, or very, very little to choose from. So in that particular instance, I'm not going to be able to stay and find 3 new construction or newer construction comps in the and this house is, the one I'm doing is 1,500 square feet, y'all. It's $743 a side. And I'm like, I mean, crazy, right? And I mean, obviously the guy's making money off of it because he's building it. And actually, this is the second one I'm doing for him. So he must have done pretty well with the first one because he's doing it again. And but I've got to go across the industrial canal. That's not my preference. My preference would be to stay in the lower 9. I think I know that the land is cheaper in the lower 9, but I've got to go over there. So there are times when you have to go further to find the thing that you're looking for. So keep that in mind if you're doing a property that has something weird, right? It's got a pool in a neighborhood where you never see pools. It's got an oversized lot. It's, whatever. That you can go over a mile, at least to find one sale, but you have to think in your mind, okay, I know this is a more valuable neighborhood. I know people are willing to pay more in the upper 9 than they are to pay at least a little. Yeah. It may not be a tremendous amount of money in the lower. So in my mind, I have to decide, or I'm not me personally, I have to do the research, but as an investor, in your mind, you need to think, all right, I'm going to have to compensate that sale somehow because I know it's more valuable, but I have to go over there to find what I'm looking for. Does that make sense? Okay.
Next question.
You're going to repeat the question?
We'll catch it on camera. We'll pick it up.
So the question was, can you go to a comparable neighborhood even if it's well over a mile,
That's
right?
good.
So yes, you can. You absolutely can. Like, and especially, we don't have that many gated communities around here, and on the West Bank, you can count them on one hand, right? So, and I've done that. I've had to do that. So, and just, I guess, to drill into that particular situation, say if I had to go to, say, Stonebridge, I would try to stay away from ones on the golf course, because like if the house I'm doing isn't on the golf course, I wouldn't go. I would, try to find one on the other side. Yes. So the rule of thumb has always been the smaller the house, the higher the price per square foot, because it to some degree, it costs X number of dollars to build a house, right? So whether it's a 1,200 square foot house or a 3,000 square foot house, your base cost to get that house up and running is what it is. And adding on square footage doesn't necessarily mean it costs that much more money after your base cost. Does that make sense? So that's, truly is why we start with square footage when we're searching. A mile, and my rule of thumb is 300 square feet either way. That's where I start, right? So if I'm appraising a 1,200 square foot house, I'm going 900 to 1,500 because that's how I'm going to find the most similar houses. And my goal is always to find the most similar house. My goal is to have a minimal amount of adjustments in that appraisal. The lower percentage I can keep, the more accurate the appraisal is going to be, because I really am truly choosing comparables that are very similar to the subject property. Does that make sense? But there's always exceptions to the rule. Back to this house I'm doing in the lower 9. I'm using 2 sales that are over 2,000 square feet because they're the only brand new houses I can find. And I'm going to be making giant adjustments for price per square foot, but I don't have a choice. So there's guidelines, things that we try to, where we start. And then when you have to adjust those guidelines because you cannot figure out what the house is worth without doing it, then that's what you do.
Yep. Last 2. Right here.
No, I'm going to try. Well, there's a thing in appraisal practice called bracketing, right? So we always try to bracket. We always try to find at least one house that's smaller, one house that's bigger, one house that's younger, one that's older, one lot that's bigger, one lot that's smaller. Because what we don't want is all of the sales going up for square footage, right? I don't want to have all my houses going up, and I don't want them all coming down either. So if I'm appraising a 900 square foot house and all of my comps are 1,400 square feet, all of them are going to come down. I want them to do this. And the lenders typically, that's what they want to. That's what the underwriter wants to see. They want to see everything bracketed. But sometimes you can't. And sometimes you just have to make a comment saying, nothing, I have nothing. So I can't do it. I went back 2 years, I went out 2 miles. It doesn't exist. So, and usually it'll be okay, as long as your adjustments are reasonable.
Yeah, one in the corner.
For lending purposes, it's usually a year. They prefer 6 months. But in reality, the appraisal really is only as good until a more similar house sells in the same neighborhood, So, it could affect you negatively, it could affect you positively, but as soon as something sells that's more similar than the comparables that are in the report, it's kind of outdated. But you may not know that,
Last question.
A couple of ways. So first I would try to figure out why. Why are the ones that are 3/4 of a mile away from your property selling for more than the ones that are a 1/4 of a mile away? That's a question you need to ask yourself, right? So you need to see if you can figure it out. Are they nicer? Like, are the ones that are, if the 3/4 of a mile away ones are nicer, well, that's a reason to go 3/4 of a mile, right? Because if the ones that are right next to you are not renovated, not as nice, then the appraiser could say, all right, I can't find any sales right in this immediate area that I think are as nice as the subject, so I'm going to go over here, and then maybe I might use this one that's a 1/4 of a mile, but I'm going to adjust it. I'm going to bump it up because it's not as nice. Then the second question you have to ask yourself is, do people pay more money 3/4 of a mile away because it's a different neighborhood, right? So, I mean, it's not, and look, this is New Orleans. Like, people pay more money from block to block around here, right? Or am I closer to Audubon Park? Am I closer to City Park? Am I, in an area where it's just higher demand? So, in that instance, the appraiser's going to know that, and they're not necessarily going to go 3/4 of a mile away. Or if they do, because they're going over there to find the nicer house, they're going to adjust it for location. Because they're going to, I mean, any appraiser who's been in this market for any amount of time is going to know that that's just a better area, even if it's within a mile. So.
Yeah, well, we got to wrap up. I want you to save your questions for Debbie. You're going to head to Caduceus?
Yes.
Okay, so Debbie will be there for Caduceus. But I do want to give a huge shout out to Kristen and Ryan. Ryan, Kristen, raise your hand. So wholesalers, realtors with properties, please reach out to Ryan and Kristen. They all buying, they all active. Send your deals to them. You want me to share the number? Yes. Okay, so 504, wholesalers, take this down, 504-214-0808. That's 504-214-0808. We want to give them a special shout out because they were the camera sponsor for tonight. Debbie, before we let you go, how can the group help you get to where you are?
Oh.
Where you want to be?
So I am looking for something to flip with good margins.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
Because I'm not much of a risk taker when it comes to flipping, y'all.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want to know I can reduce that house by 30 grand and still make money. So.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of what I'm kind of tapped out right now with doubles. I have 3 doubles I'm in the middle of renovating, and I have another one under contract. So I'll be coming back looking for doubles in a couple of months, but probably not right now. But I have some cards in the back. Please feel free to take a card. I think most of the people know me, know that I'm very accessible. I'm happy to answer questions.
Yes.
So, if I can do anything for you, please.
Well, Debbie, we want to thank you so much. We also want to thank our sponsors, Kristen and Ryan, wholesalers, realtors, anybody with off-market properties. Make sure you reach out to them. Thank you so much, Debbie. Everybody give Debbie a round of applause. Thank you. That was awesome.